The morning sun cast long shadows across Elena Martinez's front yard, illuminating the collection of sculptures that had become the talk of Oak Ridge Heights subdivision. At 63, the retired art teacher had transformed her modest quarter-acre lot into something extraordinary, a whimsical garden filled with handcrafted metal and ceramic pieces that seemed to dance in the early light. Alina's journey with sculpture began shortly after her retirement from Lincoln High School, where she had taught art for over 3 decades. The transition from teaching to retirement had left a creative void in her life, one that she filled by taking welding classes at the local community center. What started as a hobby soon blossomed into a passion that would change not only her life, but the entire neighborhood. Her first creation, a 6-foot-tall metal sunflower with moving petals that caught the wind, stood proudly near her driveway. Over the years, she added more pieces, a family of metal cats that appeared to be chasing butterflies, a series of abstract ceramic towers that changed colors when it rained, and her masterpiece, a sprawling metal tree with wind chimes for leaves that created gentle melodies on breezy days. The neighborhood children were the first to fall in love with Alina's outdoor gallery. They would stop by after school, pressing their faces against her white picket fence as she worked on new pieces in her driveway. Elena always took time to explain her creative process, often letting them help with the safer aspects of her work, like painting or arranging pieces. Parents soon began bringing their children specifically to see the magic garden, as it had come to be known. Local art teachers started organizing field trips to Elena's house, and she graciously hosted them all, sharing her techniques and inspiring a new generation of artists. Even the local newspaper had featured her garden in their Sunday edition, praising it as a unique example of community art that brought people together. For 5 years, Elena's sculpture garden flourished without incident. Her neighbors, for the most part, appreciated how her artistic touch had given their street a unique character. Property values had even increased, with real estate agents specifically mentioning the sculpture garden as a neighborhood attraction during home showings. But everything changed on a quiet Tuesday morning in March. Elena was in her workshop, putting the finishing touches on her latest creation, a series of metallic butterflies that would appear to float above her flower beds, when she heard the distinct sound of her mail slot clicking open. Among the usual bills and advertisements was a certified letter bearing the official letterhead of the Oak Ridge Heights Homeowners Association. Elena had been a resident for 15 years and had always maintained cordial relations with the HOA, even serving on the landscaping committee for several terms. She opened the letter, expecting it to be routine correspondence about upcoming community events or maintenance schedules. Instead, what she read made her hands shake. The letter, signed by Richard Thompson, the newly elected HOA president, stated in cold, official language that her sculpture garden was in violation of community guidelines. The letter cited Section 7.3 of the HOA regulations regarding lawn ornaments and exterior decorations, and demanded the removal of all 12 sculptures within 30 days. Elena sat down heavily in her favorite porch chair, the one she used while sketching new designs. The letter threatened daily fines of $100 for non-compliance, and warned of potential legal action if she failed to comply. As she reread the letter, trying to make sense of this sudden assault on her artistic expression, she noticed movement across the street. Through her tears, she could see Richard Thompson himself, standing in his immaculate front yard, watching her reaction with what appeared to be satisfaction. He had moved into the neighborhood just 8 months ago and had quickly maneuvered his way onto the HOA board, running on a platform of maintaining property values and community standards. As the reality of the situation sank in, Elena felt a mixture of emotions wash over her: anger, fear, and determination. The garden wasn't just a collection of metal and ceramic pieces. It was her legacy, a gift to the community, and a source of joy for countless visitors. The thought of dismantling it piece by piece was unbearable. That evening, as the sun set behind her beloved sculptures, casting long shadows across her lawn, Elena made a decision. She wouldn't give up without a fight. Little did she know that this was just the beginning of a battle that would test her resolve, rally her community, and ultimately change the way HOAs across the country viewed artistic expression in residential neighborhoods. The morning after receiving the HOA letter, Elena woke up to the sound of car doors slamming. Looking out her window, she saw 3 members of the HOA board, led by Richard Thompson, conducting what they called a property inspection of her front yard. They carried clipboards and cameras, photographing each of her sculptures while making disapproving notes. Richard Thompson, a former corporate executive who had retired early, stood out in his pressed khakis and polo shirt. At 55, he had quickly established himself as the most rigid HOA president in the community's history. Beside him stood Margaret Wells, the board secretary, and James Patterson, the treasurer. Elena watched as Thompson pointed at her beloved metal sunflower, gesturing animatedly to his colleagues. Through her partially open window, she could hear fragments of their conversation, completely inappropriate, reducing property values, and setting a dangerous precedent. The inspection team spent 45 minutes documenting what they considered violations, paying particular attention to the height of her sculptures and their visibility from the street. Later that morning, Elena's phone started ringing. Word of the HOA's demands had spread quickly through the neighborhood's social media groups. The first call came from Sarah Chen, a lawyer who lived 3 doors down. Her young daughters were regular visitors to the sculpture garden, and she was outraged by the HOA's actions. They can't just arbitrarily decide your art violates guidelines that have been in place for decades, Sarah explained. I've reviewed the original HOA documents from 1995, and there's nothing specific about sculpture gardens. They're overreaching. While Elena was on the phone with Sarah, another certified letter arrived. This one detailed the specific violations the morning's inspection team had documented. The list was extensive and seemingly arbitrary. The metal sunflower exceeded height restrictions for lawn ornaments by 4 feet. The wind chime tree created excessive noise pollution. The color-changing ceramic towers were deemed inappropriately bright. The metal cats posed a reflection hazard to passing cars. Even the butterfly installation she hadn't finished yet was cited as a potential distraction to drivers. The letter concluded with an itemized fine schedule that would begin in 30 days if the sculptures weren't removed. The daily fines would start at $100 per sculpture, meaning she would be charged $1,200 per day for her 12 pieces. The threat of financial ruin loomed over Elena like a dark cloud. That afternoon, Richard Thompson himself knocked on Elena's door. He stood on her porch with an air of authority, a folder tucked under his arm containing what he called a compliance agreement. "Ms. Martinez," he began, his voice carrying the practiced smoothness of someone used to getting his way, "I'm here to offer you a reasonable solution. Sign this agreement to remove the sculptures within 2 weeks instead of 30 days, and we'll waive all potential fines." Elena's hands trembled with anger, but her voice remained steady as she replied, "Mr. Thompson, these sculptures have been here for 5 years. They brought joy to countless people. Why are they suddenly a problem?" Thompson's smile never wavered as he explained that the previous board had been too lenient in enforcing community standards. "Times are changing, Ms. Martinez. Property values are at stake. We can't have our neighborhood looking like an outdoor art museum." As he turned to leave, Thompson added what felt like a threat. "I should mention that fighting this will be expensive. That HOA has a significant legal fund, and we're prepared to use it. Think carefully about your next move." What Thompson didn't know was that while he was delivering his ultimatum, Elena's neighbor Sarah Chen was already making calls to her legal colleagues. The HOA's demands had struck a nerve with many homeowners who had grown tired of increasingly restrictive rules. By sunset, Elena's kitchen table was covered with printouts of HOA regulations, property laws, and court cases involving homeowners' rights. She had received over 50 messages of support from neighbors, including several who had their own stories of dealing with Thompson's aggressive enforcement tactics. As she sorted through the documents, Elena realized this fight was about more than just her sculptures. It was about the right of homeowners to express themselves within reasonable bounds, about preventing overreach by HOA boards, and about preserving the unique character that made their neighborhood special. The battle lines were drawn, and Elena Martinez, the retired art teacher who had only wanted to share her creativity with her community, found herself at the center of what would become a precedent-setting legal challenge to HOA authority. Lisa Wong, who lived across from Elena, created a Facebook group called Save Elena's Garden that gained over 300 members in just 48 hours. Many were local residents who had personal connections to the sculptures. Parents shared stories of how their children looked forward to seeing new artwork appear. Teachers wrote about using the garden as an educational resource. Even local photographers posted pictures they had taken of the sculptures during different seasons. However, Richard Thompson had his supporters too. A smaller but vocal group of residents, mostly newer homeowners who had paid premium prices for their properties, backed the HOA's position. They created their own social media group titled Preserve Property Values, Support the HOA, which quickly became a platform for complaints about other homeowners as well. The division became visible in the physical world too. Yard signs began appearing throughout the neighborhood. Those supporting Elena displayed colorful handmade signs reading, "Art brings life," and "Save the sculptures." Thompson's supporters responded with more professional-looking signs stating support HOA guidelines and maintain community standards. The tension reached a new level when both groups decided to attend the monthly HOA meeting, normally a quiet affair attended by only a handful of residents. On a warm Thursday evening, over 150 people packed into the community center's main room, forcing the building manager to bring in extra chairs. Elena sat in the front row, surrounded by supporters wearing bright yellow badges decorated with miniature sculptures. Sarah Chen, now officially acting as Elena's legal representative, sat beside her with a thick folder of documents. Across the aisle, Thompson and his board members looked uncomfortable at the unprecedented turnout. The public comment period quickly turned heated. Mary Johnson, a retired elementary school teacher, stood up with tears in her eyes. "I bring my grandchildren to see Elena's garden every Sunday," she said. "It's become our special tradition. How can you call something that brings such joy a violation?" But Thomas Baker, a real estate agent who had recently moved to the neighborhood, countered with market statistics. "I've had potential buyers express concern about the excessive decorations," he claimed. "It's affecting all our property values." The meeting reached a dramatic turning point when Jennifer Lopez, whose daughter had autism, took the microphone. Her voice shaking with emotion, she described how Elena's sculpture garden had helped her child. "The moving pieces, the colors, the gentle sounds, they calm her when nothing else works. This garden isn't just art, it's therapy for some of us." Thompson tried to maintain control of the meeting, repeatedly citing HOA bylaws and property regulations. But his usual authoritative tone faltered when confronted with personal stories and emotional testimonies. When he attempted to cut off another resident's speech about community rights, the crowd erupted in protest. The situation took an unexpected turn when Marcus Wilson, a longtime resident and former HOA board member, revealed something crucial. "I was on the board when Elena first started her garden," he announced. "We specifically discussed it and decided it fell under landscape art, which has always been permitted. I have the meeting minutes to prove it." This revelation caused a stir in the room. Thompson's face reddened as he demanded to see the documents, but the damage to his position was already done. Several of his supporters looked uncertain, especially when Marcus produced copies of the old minutes from his briefcase. As the meeting drew to a close, it was clear that the community's division went deeper than just the sculpture garden issue. It reflected a fundamental conflict between those who valued artistic expression and community character and those who prioritized property values and uniformity. Outside the community center, residents lingered in small groups, discussing the evening's events. Elena found herself surrounded by supporters offering encouragement and help. Several people handed her checks to help with legal expenses, while others promised to testify about the garden's positive impact if the case went to court. Sarah Chen, watching the impromptu gathering, touched Elena's arm gently. "This is exactly what we need," she said quietly. "Community support like this can make a huge difference in court. Thompson may have the HOA rulebook, but we have something more powerful. We have people's hearts." As Elena drove home that night, she noticed something that made her smile through her tears. Several residents had turned on their porch lights and placed candles near their windows, a silent symbol of solidarity with her cause. The battle was far from over, but she was no longer fighting it alone. Sarah Chen's law office became a hub of activity as she and Elena delved deep into their legal research. The small conference room walls were covered with printouts of HOA regulations, property laws, and similar cases from across the country. Empty coffee cups littered the table as they worked late into the evening. Through meticulous investigation, they discovered that the original HOA guidelines, written in 1995, were remarkably different from the current version. The older document emphasized community character and individual expression within reasonable bounds. More importantly, it contained a specific clause about artistic landscaping being encouraged to enhance neighborhood appeal. This is gold, Sarah explained, highlighting the relevant sections. The original guidelines actually promoted the kind of creative expression your garden represents. Thompson's board has been selectively interpreting and enforcing rules that weren't even in the original document. Their research also uncovered several precedent-setting cases. In Florida, a homeowner had successfully defended their right to maintain a butterfly garden despite HOA objections. A case in Colorado had established limits on HOA authority over artistic expressions that didn't pose safety hazards. Each discovery strengthened their position. Meanwhile, Elena spent hours documenting her garden's history. She found photographs showing how the space had evolved from a plain lawn to its current state. Local newspaper articles praised her work's positive impact on the community. She even located thank you letters from schools that had brought students for art education visits. The breakthrough came when they discovered an old community newsletter from 2020. It featured Elena's garden on its cover, with a glowing article written by none other than the previous HOA president. The article described the sculpture garden as a crown jewel of our neighborhood and an example of the unique character we strive to maintain. Sarah's paralegal, Mike Torres, also uncovered something crucial while reviewing county records. That HOA's current hardline stance on yard decorations had only been added to the guidelines 8 months ago, coinciding with Thompson's election as president. The changes hadn't been properly communicated to all homeowners, a potential procedural violation. Look at this, Mike pointed out, showing them the documentation. They made these changes during a special session with minimal notice. Only 12 residents attended the meeting where these new rules were adopted. That's less than 5% of the neighborhood. Elena remembered that meeting. It had been scheduled on a Tuesday morning when most residents were at work. She had been teaching an art class at the community center and couldn't attend. Now she understood why Thompson had chosen that particular time. Their research also revealed a pattern of selective enforcement. Through social media and neighborhood surveys, they documented dozens of cases where certain homeowners, particularly those friendly with Thompson, had been allowed to keep decorative elements that violated the same guidelines being used against Elena. One afternoon, while reviewing satellite images of the neighborhood for their case file, Elena noticed something interesting. Thompson's own backyard contained a large ornamental fountain that exceeded the height restrictions he was using to challenge her sculptures. Sarah immediately sent her assistant to photograph it from public streets. This kind of selective enforcement is exactly what courts look for, Sarah explained. They can't enforce rules strictly against you while ignoring violations by others, especially board members themselves. The team also focused on property value claims. They contacted local real estate agents who provided data showing that home values in the vicinity of Elena's garden had actually increased more than the neighborhood average over the past 5 years. Several agents confirmed that they specifically mentioned the sculpture garden as a unique community feature during home showings. As they built their case, Elena discovered another surprising ally. Marcus Wilson, the former board member who had spoken at the HOA meeting, provided them with years of old meeting minutes. These documents showed that the previous board had consistently supported artistic expression in the community, even using Elena's garden as an example of how individual creativity could enhance neighborhood appeal. What we're building here is more than just a defense, Sarah explained as they organized their findings. We're showing that the current HOA board is actively working against the community's established character and the original intent of the guidelines. By the end of their research phase, they had assembled a compelling case that went beyond just defending Elena's right to keep her sculptures. The legal battle officially began on a crisp Monday morning when Sarah Chen filed their lawsuit against the Oak Ridge Heights HOA. The thick stack of documents detailed not only Elena's right to maintain her sculpture garden, but also outlined the HOA board's pattern of discriminatory enforcement and procedural violations. Word of the lawsuit spread quickly through the neighborhood. While Elena was working in her garden that afternoon, she noticed increased traffic on her usually quiet street. Cars drove by slowly, some neighbors offering waves of support while others glared disapprovingly. Thompson's allies took photos, presumably documenting what they considered violations. The community's financial support had been overwhelming. A GoFundMe campaign started by Lisa Wong had raised over $15,000 in just 5 days to help with legal expenses. The comments section became a testament to the garden's impact. filled with stories from residents, visitors, and even people from neighboring communities who had found joy in Elena's creations. The HOA board's response came swiftly and aggressively. Their lawyer, Benjamin Harris, a specialist in property law known for representing homeowners associations, filed a counter-motion demanding immediate removal of the sculptures and seeking punitive damages for willful violation of community standards. Sarah received the counter-motion with a knowing smile. "They're trying to intimidate us," she explained to Elena. "But they've made a crucial mistake. By seeking punitive damages, they've opened the door for us to conduct extensive discovery into the board's decision-making process." The discovery phase revealed troubling patterns. Emails between board members, which they were legally required to produce, showed that Thompson had specifically targeted Elena's garden as part of a larger plan to modernize the neighborhood's image. In one particularly damaging exchange, he had written, "Once we get rid of the Martinez-izers, we can start cleaning up the rest of these personal expressions that are dragging down our property values." More evidence emerged when Jennifer Lopez, whose autistic daughter found comfort in the garden, shared security camera footage from her home. The video showed Thompson and two other board members conducting unauthorized inspections of Elena's property, sometimes late in the evening, taking photos and measurements without permission. The case took an unexpected turn when local media picked up the story. A reporter from the city newspaper wrote a feature article titled "Art versus Authority: The Battle for Neighborhood Soul." The piece went viral on social media, drawing attention from art advocacy groups and property rights organizations across the country. Several organizations filed amicus briefs supporting Elena's position. The National Art Education Association offered expert testimony about the educational value of public art installations. A real estate analytics firm provided data showing that unique community features like Elena's garden often increased property values by making neighborhoods more distinctive and desirable. Thompson's position began to weaken when three former HOA board members came forward. They provided sworn statements confirming that Elena's garden had been previously approved and even celebrated as a community asset. Their testimonies directly contradicted Thompson's claim that the garden had always been in violation of community standards. The pressure mounted when an anonymous source provided Sarah with documents showing that Thompson had personal financial interests in a property development company. The company specialized in buying and flipping houses in neighborhoods with strict HOA regulations. This revelation raised questions about his motivations for tightening community restrictions. Elena found unexpected support from Dr. James Miller, a renowned urban planning professor who lived in a nearby subdivision. After visiting the garden, he offered to testify as an expert witness about the positive impact of public art on community cohesion and property values. "What we're seeing here," Dr. Miller explained during his deposition, "is a classic conflict between community character and standardization. Ms. Martinez's garden represents the kind of unique, organic neighborhood development that actually enhances property values by creating a sense of place." As the legal proceedings continued, Elena noticed a shift in the neighborhood's atmosphere. More residents began adding artistic elements to their own yards, small sculptures, colorful gardens, and decorative features. It seemed like a quiet rebellion against the HOA's attempts to enforce conformity. Sarah worked late into the nights, preparing their case for court. She knew they needed to do more than just defend Elena's right to keep her sculptures. They needed to establish legal precedent protecting homeowners' rights to reasonable artistic acts. The investigation into the HOA's practices deepened when Sarah Chen received an anonymous envelope containing internal HOA documents. The papers revealed a disturbing pattern of selective enforcement under Thompson's leadership. While Elena's sculptures were being targeted, similar violations by board members and their friends have been consistently overlooked. Sarah methodically built a spreadsheet documenting these disparities. Board member Margaret Wells had a decorative fountain that exceeded height restrictions. James Patterson had installed unapproved landscape lighting. Thompson himself had constructed an elaborate treehouse for his grandchildren without proper permits. None of these violations have been cited or fined. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Maria Gonzalez, the HOA's former secretary, came forward. She had resigned 3 months earlier after disagreeing with Thompson's aggressive enforcement policies. During a recorded deposition, Maria revealed how Thompson had manipulated board meetings to push through his agenda. He would schedule important votes when certain members couldn't attend, Maria testified. The changes to the architectural guidelines were passed during a special session at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. Most working residents couldn't be there, and that was intentional. Alina's team also discovered that Thompson had business connections that raised serious conflict of interest concerns. His son-in-law worked for a property management company that stood to gain contracts if the neighborhood adopted stricter regulations. These connections had never been disclosed to the community. The investigation revealed more allies for Alina. Susan Parker, a real estate agent who had initially supported Thompson, switched sides after reviewing her sales data. She provided documentation showing that homes near Alina's garden actually sold faster and at higher prices than similar properties in the neighborhood. Buyers consistently mentioned the sculpture garden as a positive feature. Susan stated in her affidavit, "It gives our neighborhood a unique character that sets it apart from cookie-cutter subdivisions." Local businesses also joined the investigation. The owner of a nearby coffee shop shared security camera footage showing Thompson meeting with a developer who had been trying to buy properties in the neighborhood. The meeting had taken place just days before the new restrictions were proposed. Dr. Emily Chang, a sociologist from the local university, conducted a community impact study. Her research showed that Alina's garden had become a cultural hub, hosting informal art classes, photography sessions, and community gatherings. The study concluded that such spaces significantly enhanced neighborhood social bonds and property values. The investigation uncovered emails between Thompson and his allies discussing their broader agenda. They planned to implement restrictions that would effectively standardize all homes in the neighborhood, making them more attractive to corporate buyers looking to convert single-family homes into rental properties. Former board member Marcus Wilson provided crucial evidence about the original intent of the HOA guidelines. He had served on the committee that drafted them in 1995. The purpose was never to create uniformity, he explained. We wanted to protect property values while encouraging individual expression. Alina's garden embodies exactly what we envisioned. Sarah's team also discovered that Thompson had violated HOA bylaws in his election as president. The required notice period for the election meeting had not been met, and several eligible candidates had been discouraged from running through intimidation tactics. The investigation gained unexpected support when Thompson's own neighbor, Robert Chen, no relation to Sarah, came forward. Robert had been maintaining detailed records of HOA activities since Thompson moved in. His documentation showed how enforcement patterns had changed dramatically under the new leadership. I watched them measure Alina's sculptures with laser tools, Robert reported, but when I complained about Thompson's unauthorized pool house addition, they ignored me completely. Professional assessments further strengthened Alina's case. A certified property appraiser evaluated homes throughout the neighborhood and concluded that unique features like the sculpture garden created micro-neighborhoods that actually increased overall property values. Local art teachers provided testimony about the educational value of the garden. They had been bringing students there for years, using it as an example of how art could transform public spaces. Their documentation included hundreds of student essays and artwork inspired by Alina's sculptures. The courthouse steps were crowded on the morning of the hearing. Alina arrived early, accompanied by Sarah Chen and their legal team, to find dozens of supporters holding handmade signs with pictures of her sculptures. Local news crews had set up their cameras, sensing the story's significance beyond a simple HOA dispute. Inside the courtroom, Judge Patricia Rodriguez presided over the case. Known for her balanced approach to property rights issues, she began by reviewing the extensive documentation both sides had submitted. Thompson and his legal team sat stiffly on one side while Alina and her supporters filled the other half of the courtroom. Sarah Chen opened their case with a powerful statement. This isn't just about garden sculptures. It's about the fundamental rights of homeowners and the abuse of HOA authority for personal agendas. She then methodically presented their evidence, starting with the original 1995 HOA guidelines that explicitly encouraged artistic expression. The judge showed particular interest in the community impact documentation. She carefully reviewed photographs showing how Alina's garden had evolved over 5 years, along with testimonials from neighbors, teachers, and local businesses about its positive influence on the neighborhood. Thompson's attorney, Benjamin Harris, argued that property values were the HOA's primary concern. However, His position weakened when Sarah presented the real estate data showing increased property values near the sculpture garden. The judge asked pointed questions about why the HOA hadn't conducted its own property value study before demanding the sculpture's removal. A crucial moment came when Maria Gonzalez, the former HOA secretary, took the stand. She testified about Thompson's selective enforcement of rules and his manipulation of board meetings to push through agenda items without proper community input. The judge took extensive notes during her testimony. Dr. Emily Chang presented her community impact study, explaining how the sculpture garden had become a vital part of the neighborhood's social fabric. In my 20 years of studying suburban communities, she testified, I've rarely seen a private property feature that generates such positive community engagement. Thompson's testimony proved problematic for his case. Under Sarah's careful cross-examination, he struggled to explain why certain violations were aggressively pursued while others were ignored. When questioned about his business connections to property developers, he became visibly uncomfortable. The judge seemed particularly concerned about the procedural violations in implementing the new restrictions. Mr. Thompson, she interrupted at one point, are you saying these significant changes to community guidelines were voted on at a meeting attended by less than 5% of homeowners? Susan Parker's testimony about real estate values directly contradicted the HOA's claims. She presented sales data showing that homes near Elena's garden sold for an average of 7% more than similar properties in the neighborhood. Buyers specifically ask about the sculpture garden, she explained. It's become a selling point. Robert Chen's detailed documentation of selective enforcement drew the judge's attention. His photographs and notes showed clear patterns of favoritism in HOA enforcement decisions. The judge asked several follow-up questions about specific incidents he had recorded. During a brief recess, Elena sat quietly sketching in her notebook, a habit that helped calm her nerves. She was drawing a new sculpture design, one that represented justice and community unity. Several observers noticed and smiled, seeing her artistic spirit remained unbroken despite the legal battle. When the hearing resumed, Sarah presented their final argument. She highlighted how the HOA's actions violated not only their own original guidelines, but also state laws protecting homeowners' rights. She emphasized the community's overwhelming support for the garden and its documented benefits to the neighborhood. Benjamin Harris attempted to redirect the focus to HOA authority and uniform community standards, but his arguments seemed to lose impact as the judge reviewed the evidence of selective enforcement and procedural violations. Near the end of the hearing, Judge Rodriguez asked both sides a crucial question. How does this case serve the best interests of the community? Sarah's response focused on preserving community character and protecting homeowner rights, while Harris struggled to justify the HOA's positions beyond abstract property value concerns. The courtroom was silent as Judge Rodriguez reviewed her notes one final time. She looked at the photographs of Elena's sculptures, the community impact studies, and the Monday morning of Judge Rodriguez's ruling arrived with unprecedented attendance in the courtroom. Every seat was filled, and additional chairs had been brought in to accommodate the crowd. Elena sat between Sarah Chen and her neighbor Lisa Wan, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Judge Rodriguez entered the courtroom precisely at 9:00 a.m. The room fell silent as she organized her papers and prepared to deliver her ruling. Her expression was neutral, but her voice was clear and firm as she began to speak. After careful consideration of all evidence presented, this court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Elena Martinez, she announced. The courtroom erupted in muffled cheers before the judge called for order. Judge Rodriguez's ruling was comprehensive. She found that the HOA had exceeded its authority and violated its own procedures in several ways. The original HOA guidelines, she noted, had specifically encouraged artistic expression and community character, elements that Elena's sculpture garden exemplified. The judge particularly emphasized the HOA's failure to follow proper procedures in changing community guidelines. The board's attempt to implement significant changes without adequate community input represents a serious breach of their fiduciary duty, she stated. She ordered the immediate nullification of Thompson's restrictive amendments. More significantly, the ruling established clear precedents for similar cases. Judge Rodriguez ordered that the HOA could not demand removal of any of Elena's existing sculptures and must establish clear, objective criteria for evaluating future artistic installations. She also mandated that any new HOA guidelines affecting property aesthetics would require approval from at least 60% of homeowners. The ruling included specific measures to prevent future abuse of power. The HOA board was required to document all violation notices, complete with photographic evidence and written explanations of how each violation was determined. This documentation would be available for review by any homeowner. Thompson, sitting with his legal team, visibly deflated as the judge continued. The ruling required him to personally pay Elena's legal fees due to his arbitrary and capricious enforcement of HOA rules. Additionally, the judge ordered an independent audit of all HOA decisions made during his tenure. After the ruling, the courthouse steps became a scene of celebration. Elena found herself surrounded by neighbors, supporters, and media reporters. Local news cameras captured the moment as she hugged Sarah Chen, both of them with tears of joy in their eyes. The impact of the ruling spread quickly beyond Oak Ridge Heights. By afternoon, property rights organizations and HOA reform advocates across the country were citing the case as a landmark decision protecting homeowners' rights to reasonable artistic expression. The following weekend, Elena's Sculpture Garden hosted its largest gathering ever. The community organized a celebration that became known as the Art and Justice Festival. Hundreds of visitors came to see the sculptures that had sparked such an important legal battle. Thompson resigned from the HOA board the following week. The new board, led by Marcus Wilson, began working on updated guidelines that balanced community standards with individual expression. They used Elena's case as a model for how to protect both property values and homeowner rights. Other changes followed quickly. The HOA established an art advisory committee, with Elena as its first chairperson, to review and provide guidance on artistic installations in the community. Several neighbors, inspired by her victory, began their own creative projects, transforming Oak Ridge Heights into what local papers called a gallery of community expression. Elena's newest sculpture, created during the legal battle, became the centerpiece of her garden. Titled Justice Blooms, it featured interwoven metal flowers rising from a base inscribed with the date of the court victory. The piece became a symbol of how one person's stand against unreasonable authority could benefit an entire community. Sarah Chen's law firm began receiving calls from homeowners and attorneys nationwide, seeking advice on similar cases. The ruling had created a legal framework for protecting individual expression within HOA communities, while still maintaining reasonable community standards. 1 year after the ruling, Oak Ridge Heights had transformed. Property values had indeed risen, but not because of restrictive guidelines. The neighborhood became known for its unique character and strong sense of community. Real estate agents now prominently featured Elena's garden and the neighborhood's artistic atmosphere in their listings. Elena continued to create new sculptures, each one adding to the garden's evolving story. She also began teaching free art classes to neighborhood children,